listening to the Today's Mama podcast with your host, Rachel Hersher. If you've been listening to this podcast, by now you know we believe in miracles. And there's no better time for a great miracle story than the holidays. So cozy in and get ready to enjoy this story of a little Korean girl with a mysterious tattoo that reunited her family. Every so often you're scrolling through Facebook and you stumble upon some miraculous story. Sometimes it's a viral video, sometimes it's fake news, and sometimes it's the story of your friend, someone you actually know. And seriously, this one is movie-worthy stuff. I happened to scroll past this story of a little Korean girl with a mysterious tattoo that reunited her family, and it made me cry all the tears. Today, we're talking to that little Korean girl. She's my friend, Sara Dansie Jones, whom I've known for years through our awesome tech community here in Utah. She's been a huge advocate for women and girls in tech, small businesses, startups, all the things. But today, we're going to talk mostly about the miracle of the Yoon tattoo. Welcome to the podcast, Sara.
Thank you.
And did I say it right? I always double check this. So is it the Yoon tattoo?
You know, that's what I called it just for after this all happened and just realizing how unique it is. I started calling it the Yoon tattoo, Yoon being my Korean family name.
Okay.
Actually always known, but I actually never knew what the tattoo meant. So, just as amazing as this has been, and honestly, sometimes I can't even believe it's really my story. I sometimes feel like I'm living somebody else's fairy tale. So that's what I call it, is the Yoon tattoo. And it's caught on, I think, because of the uniqueness of it.
Let's start way back at the very beginning. And I want to know first, what's your earliest memory just in life? You know what I mean? Because you've got a little chunk that was there in Korea and then a whole big chunk that came over here to the US. What is your very first childhood memory?
You know, I remember just small glimpses of me as a child in the home that I grew up, which we moved from that home when I was first adopted to Sandy, Utah, to another home. So just glimpses of that home, really. I just don't remember anything from Korea. And I think for those who understand childhood trauma, it's very understandable that my brain blocks out all of those memories. Other than the stories that I was told about what happened when I was young, it's really hard for me to even remember that far back.
Well, so tell us the story of your adoption.
Yeah, so I actually have two other sisters. My oldest sister is also adopted from Busan. So totally different city than where I was born and where I come from. And so she was adopted first. And then my parents were able to get pregnant with my younger sister, Leanne. So my oldest sister's Mindy, my younger sister's Leanne. And then the adoption agency said, well, let's give it a little bit to let your other kids acclimate and bond in the family, and then you can proceed with another adoption. And so they waited for that, and then they proceeded to adopt me. So age-wise, I actually fall in between my sisters, so which is kind of strange. Something fun about my adoption that I found out. So my birth date put me at about 2.5 years when I was adopted. I always thought that I was a summer baby. And it turns out when I started my adoption search, one of the first things that I found out was that my birth date is actually 7 months earlier than I actually thought it was, all growing up for 42 years, right?
So all of a sudden you aged up.
Yeah, which was, when you're 40 something is not super exciting news.
Harsh.
It's super harsh. And so, if anyone knows anything about how Koreans actually do birth dates, you're actually 1 year old when you're born.
Oh, that's like a double whammy.
It's horrible. So I really love how Americans do age. Everybody always asks me, well, which birthday are you going to use? And I just decided, it's just way too hard legally to do anything about my legally assigned birth dates. So I'll just leave that the way it is. And then I'll just celebrate both birthdays. I get to celebrate my American age. And then I also get to celebrate
your elderly Korean age.
Exactly. And sort of have go into denial again after that and say, no, I'm really 44. I'm not 40. 7-ish. So,
Okay, now a lot of our identities can be wrapped up in our birthdays, right? So, I mean, I'm big on the fact that like I'm an Aquarius and Justin Timberlake and I share a birthday and Oprah's is the day before mine and just I there's numerology and all the things. How much was your birthday tied to your identity in that way? Do you feel like you are one sign over another? Like you thought you were a Leo, but now you're a Capricorn and like, what's up?
oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, being a summer baby all the time. Well, first of all, everybody hates being a summer baby in school because you never get to celebrate it during the school year, right?
Yeah.
So I always felt gypped. And then, I actually loved being a Cancer. There's this kind of like, I don't know, like kind of spunkiness that has always come with a Cancer. And my friend who I had met, probably in the last couple of years, she's like, I swear you're a Sagittarius.
Really?
Now, I'm not that big into zodiac signs, but it just made me laugh because another fun fact about Korean birth dates is they actually calculate off the lunar calendar. So that's why the Chinese and Korean New Year changes every single year, right? Because they're going
Oh,
lunar cycles.
yeah.
You're actually given a birth date, which is the actual lunar day that you were born, but that's not an actual solar calendar date. So here I am thinking my birthday's on November 17th, which is actually whatever the zodiac sign is before Sagittarius.
Oh,
Forget what it is.
what month is it?
November. So November 17th. So whatever that, I'm not,
Okay, I know like Virgo's September.
yes. Anyway, so I have to communicate with my family using Google Translator because I do not speak Korean. And so I kept getting messages from my uncle, lunar this, lunar that, da 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 da. And I'm just like, okay, I can't even process this. Come to find out that I was all excited about celebrating my birthday on November 17th. I'm like, great, it's before the holidays. Like, there's nothing really around the 17th. That'll be great. And come to find out, when you actually calculate it on a solar calendar, my birthday is actually December 11th, which puts me into Sagittarius.
Yes. Okay, now, and here's what I figured out. You go Libra and Scorpio happen in October. So Scorpio transitions through November and then I think moves to Sagittarius. Does
Okay.
that sound appropriate?
Yep. Yep. You're right. Scorpion, because my oldest son is a November baby. And I thought when I first learned about my birth date that we were the same zodiac sign. So I remember putting a little scorpion symbol on that when I was doing a Facebook post about it.
Yeah.
So the other thing, Rachel, about birthdays is, I mean, as parents, right, we actually tie a lot of schooling to birth dates.
Yes.
Should we hold our kids back? Da 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 da, depending on when the birthday and the school year starts. So growing up, so again, my older sister's a year older than me, right? And my parents and the principals were like, oh, well, your child is gifted and talented. She should actually be bumped up a grade. So
Oh my gosh.
they struggled with that in kindergarten, first grade, because I had a sister that was 1 year older. And when you have siblings in the same grade, it causes all sorts of strange dynamics, right?
Yes.
And so I laugh now because I'm like, I was gifted and talented because I was 8 months older than I really thought I was. Of course, I was ahead.
But also think about maybe the extra bit of confidence that that just gave you, like about your capacity. Like, oh yeah, I'm just kind of gifted and talented. No big deal, you know?
No big deal, right? They're always really quick to reassure me, like, no, 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 you're really smart. I'm like, well, but, let's be practical about this, right? If you have a child that has a 7-month head start on other kids and what they're learning, like they were like, oh, she can tie her shoes already. She's potty trained already. Like, wow, she can teach herself how to read, right? All of those things,
Yeah.
even a 6-month head start, it can advance them really quickly at a very young age. So I just giggle about that now because, my parents were always like, we didn't know what to do with you because you were so gifted and talented. And I'm like, well, I just was old. And so,
Well, and I am sure you are a very gifted and talented person. So it doesn't delete everything, right? I mean, you got some magic in there, so it's good.
well, it's an interesting exercise in belief systems of what you tell kids at a young age.
Yes. And how we rise to what we believe we are, maybe.
That's right.
Tell me, what drew your parents to Korea in the first place? Obviously, your older sibling was adopted from Korea, but what kind of was the pull for them to that area of the world?
Yeah, that's a great question. Korea over the last, 50 years or so, since the 1950s and everybody knows about the Korean War and just a lot of the downfall from that economically in the country. So Korea was a big adoption country at the time. It was because of the culture, children who were, in these crisis situations didn't have Korean homes to go to. It was not a thing to adopt for Koreans to adopt other Korean children. And so over the last 50, 60 years, there's actually been over 200,000 children that have been adopted out of the country. Once, people pushed back internally in Korea and said, hey, that really isn't right. Let's figure out what the social systems are that we need to make sure that these children can be raised in their home country. And then that's where you saw a big drop off, right, in recent years. And it's super tough now to actually adopt children from Korea. And now you've seen that transition to other countries like China, the Philippines, Cambodia, other countries. And so that really, my parents were looking at countries where it was easier to adopt. Holt Adoption Agency was the agency I went through, and they're a highly structured organization internationally. They've got adoption sites all over the world. And so that's who my parents chose to work with.
Did you find growing up that you have found many other Korean kids that you've met that were adopted because of that? Because I also feel like the community we live in adopts a lot anyway.
Right. So a lot of children are adopted by more conservative communities, right, that want to do a good thing for children that have homes. And so Utah is one of those that adopted lots and lots of children. Actually, I have met a lot of Korean adoptees, actually from all over around the world. And, it was one of those things when you grow up in America and you have this very American centric view of the world that really kind of pushed my thinking around all of the other countries that stepped in also to have their citizens adopt children all over. I mean, when you meet Koreans from other countries, they become their country, right? I mean, there's cultural things that are so interesting. And you're looking at a Korean and you're like, I know you're a Korean, but you sound like an Italian or you sound like an Australian, right? And they adopt those cultural things. You talk to a Korean from France and they're like, oh my gosh, your English makes my head hurt, right? Which is a very French thing. And so it's a fascinating cultural study on nature and nurture that Koreans, good people lived all over the world. It wasn't just Americans that stepped in to support the need of South Koreans.
I love that. And what an interesting community of Korean born people in that age range. It'd be awesome to get them all in like one big arena.
Yeah. And it's good because there aren't. Now, growing up, there in the state of Utah, there were Korean camps and things like that. But my parents didn't do those. We would go to the Asian festival. My parents made sure to take us to Korean restaurants every once in a while, and they did the best they could to, give me that exposure to Korean culture. There are much more intense culture camps where not just adoptees, but actually Korean Americans, right? Because there's a lot of first, second, third generation Koreans that live in America and other countries in the world where parents want them to have exposure to Korean culture. And so these things are all over the world and they can be really good things to provide that exposure and that connection. I'm not going to speak for all adoptees, but there are some that deeply, deeply crave that connection. And then there is some that don't, right? So I don't think anyone can assume that all Korean adoptees want that connection. I've talked to some that are like, I have no interest I've never tried Korean food. I have no interest in learning. I'm American and I love being who I am. And every adoptee has that right, to choose where they want to be in terms of their own personal identity, right? And so it's been really interesting to talk to a lot of people in just a lot of different situations.
Well, and you've listed some of your foods, like what you eat with your breakfast or some of your favorite foods, Korean barbecue, are Korean food. And I would have to think, I mean, Utah's not the most diverse place on planet Earth, but we've gotten better. I can actually name a couple Korean restaurants, right? Like Korean barbecue, like we got a cup bop. Tell me I'm right that cup bop is the food truck that's got really good Korean bowls.
I'll tell you why I love cup bop. I think that for a lot of people, it's a stretch to go to real Korean food, if that makes sense.
I don't even know where to look, right? Like I've lived here my whole life. I don't even
Mhm.
know where I'm going to go seek it out.
That's right. And unfortunately, people, white people, unfortunately, some of the first things that comes out of their mouth is, I hate kimchi, right? And so if they're telling people about Korean food or their Korean food experience, they're actually sometimes starting out off with this negative thing, which scares people. And the fact is actually Korean food is one of the most delicious food on planet Earth. It's flavorful, savory, and actually most of the ingredients you can just get at your normal food store. It's a shame, right? So here's why I love Cup I love Cup because Cup has found a great way to deliver Korean-esque food to the masses, to make it less scary.
So their first touch point is super positive.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'll go.
And when you say cup bop, you're just kind of happy.
Yeah, exactly. I think they've made it fun. I think they've made it an easy gateway drug to real Korean food, right? And then once the
Yes.
right Korean food experience, if somebody tells me I hated kimchi, I'm like, oh, I mean, did you go with somebody that really appreciates and knows how to serve you Korean food in the right way instead of just put a bowl of kimchi in front of you? Who does that? Nobody. Because the right Korean food experience actually, like, for vegans, for vegetarians, for people who love barbecue, it is actually an amazing experience. And so it's always unfortunate for me when that's what people have experienced. So that's why I love Cup Up. I will never tell people not to go there. I think it's a great entry point, and a lot of Americans love it. I think it's great.
It's a great way to warm up your palate. There you go.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I have to tell you, I've never had kimchi, but it's probably one of my favorite words in the world. My daughter named her little penguin, her stuffed penguin, Kimchi, and it's just like, to me, the cutest name on the planet. So I just have like a little warm place in my heart for kimchi.
That's awesome.
Okay, so what's your, growing up here in the United States, in Utah, what is your ratatouille growing up? What's the food that takes you back to being a kid, or the sight or the smell or whatever it is?
I'd say it's probably goulash, but not in the way that other people think of goulash.
Oh, that's so 80s. Don't you feel goulash is just
Right?
like an 80s food, like late 70s, 80s food?
Yep. Yep. And it's not like stroganoff goulash. I am a lower white, middle class trying to get by. Actually, a lot of our neighborhood, I grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood, but a lot of financial struggles in the 80s, right? I mean, interest rates were super high back then. A lot of people drinking powdered milk.
Yeah.
And so the goulash that I'm referring to is, elbow macaroni, hamburger, jar of bottled tomatoes, salt and pepper, and some cheddar cheese thrown in.
That is also my goulash.
Okay. All right then. I made it for my husband for the first time a couple years ago, and he's like, "This is really delicious."
It
And
is.
so that's what I grew up on.
Yep, my mom would throw down some goulash like it was nobody's business. And then I don't know why she'd like throw Ritz crackers in the mix.
That's right.
It just seemed like a nice pairing
That feels
with the goulash.
feels very 80s as well.
Yep.
My mom extra rice and just switched the elbow macaroni for rice.
It's a thing you can do.
That's right.
You're listening to the Today's Mama podcast with your host, Rachel Hersher. We'll be back right after this.
We inherit lots of things from our families. My green eyes come from my mom, my blonde hair, some distant Scandinavian ancestor, I'm sure. I hope I got my grandmother's resilience. I also inherited her potato roll recipe, and it's like a 3-day process. With all of that in mind, we've put together a big collection of holiday recipes. Recipes inherited from our mothers and grandmothers, the stuff that yells home and holidays the minute it hits your lips. We're featuring recipes from our staff, from other bloggers, and from you too. This is all in an effort to remind you to think about what you've inherited, all that good stuff, and the stuff you want to plan for too. So, if you have a family member who's had breast cancer under the age of 50, your mom, your aunt, your grandmother, there's a chance there's a gene mutation that might be present in your family. If so, this may not only increase your own personal risk, it means the risk could be passed along to the next generation. Myriad Genetics Hereditary Cancer Quiz helps you to assess whether you might be a good candidate for testing. This quiz can help you get the information you need to discuss your risk of cancer with your healthcare provider and help you take the steps to prevent it. Take the Myriad Hereditary Cancer Quiz, snag some classic holiday recipes, and enter to win a huge pile of bright and shiny prizes valued up to $2,000 by visiting todaysmama.com/myrisk. Brought to you by Myriad Genetics.
And now back to the Today's Mama podcast with your host, Rachel Hersher.
Well, describe your life now. So you grew up here in Utah. Now you're like grown up, married, 2 kids. What is life like now?
I've reinvented myself lots of times, a lot of times in my career. And I actually think I'm kind of known for that, for good or ill. I have no idea. So right now, I'm actually just taking on projects that I just enjoy doing, right? I think I feel I'm very fortunate to be able to do that, and just raising my kids and just sort of taking life project by project. I've sort of learned over the last 20 years or so that the planning thing that I used to do is just doesn't make any logical sense with how the real life works when it throws these curveballs at you, right? And so I found that if I just take on really interesting projects, that life is so much better. I'm happier. And then I can just kind of mix it in with all the other things that I want to do with my life.
And you want to know what I love so much about the business plan? Because we both have kind of been in worlds where that's a big emphasis. If you're raising money for a business or you have a startup or you're working with a company, everybody is so obsessed with the pitch and the business plan. And the funny thing to me is the business plan never goes according to plan.
Mm-hmm.
And we put so much emphasis on that, where we should be putting a little more emphasis on how well do you adapt to change? What do you do when you're thrown a curveball? What do you do when things don't go as to plan? Because I think the thing we can say with like 100% confidence is life and business never go according to plan.
Absolutely. Like if you even just take my adoption, for example, like I felt like my life was kind of on hold for 2 or 3 months while I figured that out, right? I mean, it just was whoa. And luckily, I had the flexibility to be able to sort it out and say like, okay, I can kind of flex on certain projects and things like that. And I had very understanding people that I worked with that kind of let me have that time to. Now I had to add on a lot of other things while I figured out, is this really my birth family? How soon do I try to meet them? Do I take my whole family?
Well, and let's talk about, before we go too far there, let's talk about how you got there. So you got to this stage in your life when, well, first let's say, tell us about the tattoo that you've had your whole life.
Yeah, I got the tattoo when I was about 2 years old. And it turns out that my older brother actually remembers all of us getting the tattoo. And so they said it was because my father got ill and was unable to take care of us. And he actually had surgery, wasn't able to walk. And so the situation was really dire. And so he was really afraid when he turned over his parental rights that we would be separated. And he wanted us to have a way that we could find each other. Now, we always suspected that that's probably what the tattoo was for, but I never actually knew. My adoption papers didn't say anything except the fact that they noticed that it was there. They just described what it looked like, but I didn't have any idea what it meant. So I would ask people, if I felt like it. My parents actually had it surgically removed through skin grafting. So I have a light scar. If you look at my arm, you actually really can't tell that it's there. I have to point it out to people, and then they're like, oh, I see it now. And so I had the luxury of being able to talk about my tattoo when I wanted to, but for the most part, not needing to really care about it because it wasn't super visible. So I've always known that it's there and that it was part of my adoption story.
Why and how did you get to that place when you decided, I am going to seek after and find my birth family?
Great question. I think that, in hindsight, I feel like I was really focused on my career and family for a long, long time. And what that does is that actually I hadn't given myself time to actually think about what my adoption meant to me. And there's a lot of, psychological reasons for that as well. And of not wanting to really process all of what had happened. And so I just got to a point where I thought, I'm getting older. You start thinking about like, it's sad to say the second half of your life. And I've got these kids too, right? That, my oldest son was starting to ask about biological family and things like that. And for the most part, I had been like, I'm happy, I'm successful. I wasn't one of those that had this intense craving for a long time to find my birth family. And then just all of a sudden, it just kind of switched. I was like, well, one of the things you have to recognize is when you do a family search, you sort of have to be okay with whatever it is that you find. You might not find anything, right? And you have to be okay with that. Or you might find out something horrible, and then you have to be okay with that, right? I mean, it is a decision that you sort of have to process. The act of finding your family, you have to process that, right? Just even getting to that decision of being able to say, look, I'm going to start putting some feelers out there. And if something turns up, I have to be okay with whatever that is. I realized that I was luckier than a lot of adoptees having a tattoo, having a symbol. I've actually asked around a lot to other adoptees, and there are not a lot of tattoos sitting out there on Korean adoptees because it was taboo, just like it was in America back then to have tattoos, right? And the process of tattooing children is not a socially acceptable practice. And so there's actually a database of Koreans that are looking for their families. And if you do a keyword search for tattoo, mine's the only profile out of about 8,000 profiles on there with the word tattoo. So that's how unique it is. And I actually knew that it was really unique. And so decided to use that to try to help me find my family.
I bag on social media a lot, even though my businesses have been built around social media. I think we're in a day and an age when I think we've realized a lot of the bad things about social media. But honestly, I look at your story and I say, how else could have this come together without social media? So talk about, how you use social media and where that led this whole story.
Yeah, so I put a picture of my tattoo, and so I actually drew over it with a permanent marker, right? Because I realized people won't see what it looks like. So I posted a picture of it in my profile, and then I posted it on Facebook and started reaching out to Facebook groups in Jeonju, which is the city where I was born, because I thought, well, I'll start there and just kind of see if I can appeal to the masses to help me. Now, I speak English, so this is the challenge of any Korean adoptee really is getting it in front of the Korean people, right? Because they're really the only ones that are going to remember anything. In the past, there have been TV shows and reality TV shows where they brought Korean adoptees that have unique information, but I didn't know how to access a Korean TV show, right? So I'm, just, okay, I'll use Facebook. It's something I know social media really well. And then luckily another group within Korea, it's a group of Koreans that represent lost children that families are trying to find. They were trying to also be much more proactive about this because the database I was telling you about, that group, it's Korean Adoption Services. They don't really push out stories, right? But they have this database sitting there. So they saw my profile and my story and they said, wow, that tattoo story is so unique. That's really interesting. And at first they were really worried because they thought, well, maybe it's a gang sign. And so they were like, well, let's just take a risk and let's push out her story on Facebook. So here I am pushing my story out. Here they are in parallel, which is awesome. They're the ones on their Facebook channel because they had a lot of Koreans that were connected to them. And luckily, my brother had a friend who knew him since middle school. My brother's 50 years old. His friend remembered seeing the tattoo on his arm, and he saw that Facebook post that they did. And within 3 hours, he made the connection. And he's like, I think she's your sister.
So many miracles, so many things that had to come together.
Exactly.
To make that happen.
Yeah. And, my older brother is actually tattooed over his tattoo since then. And so if somebody had known him now, they would never have known to connect him with my story. I was able to actually meet his childhood friend when I was in Korea and just thank him and give him big hugs. And he spent the week with us. He's just a lovely human being. And so I'm just so grateful, right, that all of these pieces came together to find and connect me back to my birth family.
So this guy gets in touch with your brother. Who circles back to you?
So They reached out to Korean Adoption Services, which is the original database that I had put my profile on, which also included because they had my email address. It turns out that they had a really old email. I mean, we're all using these old email addresses.
It had like a Hotmail.
Yeah, like a Yahoo account, right? And so they actually had tried to reach out to me earlier, and I just totally missed it because it's my spam account, right? I throw, any subscription stuff I use.
Your J. Crew discounts.
Yeah, yeah. So this is why the parallel effort was so important, because a woman who worked at Jeonju City Hall had reached out to me. She said, "How can I help you? Can I help you get into newspapers?" She's the one that actually helped me get onto a TV news station that broadcasted my story across all of Korea. So there's these angels that were all over. They had no idea who I was, that were willing to help. And so she had actually reached out to Korean Adoption Services and said, "Hey, I'm working with a Korean adoptee. Just so you know, in case her family finds her, here's how to reach her." And she had my updated contact information. So again, another series of miracles that helped make sure that they could communicate with me. They also helped interpret, Korean Adoption Services helped interpret for me and my Korean family until the DNA test results came back. And then after that, I just started communicating with my Korean family directly.
So did you end up, they found your right contact information. So did you get an email or a Facebook message? And what was that experience like when that just finally landed in your inbox?
Oh, I got an email just sitting in my office, sitting at the same spot that I'm talking to you at. And this email came through and it said, "Hello, I think we found your birth family. You've got 2 brothers, an uncle that want to reach you." And I was stunned. Like, you just never expect to get that email. You never expect to get that communication. Just stunned. And then I started crying, and my husband was working it was in our office. And it was just such an intense emotional moment, because it is something that you just don't ever expect to happen. And to just get that, and just as an adoptee, at least I think there are some that do visualize what they believe their Korean adoptee family is. And to even know that I had brothers, right? I mean, my world has lots of women in it, and I've got sisters, and I never grew up with brothers. And I had foster brothers, but I just never envisioned myself actually having brothers, right? And so there's a whole set of information that just comes in, and it's like, wow.
And a set of information that was also instantly missing. Like, how did you process that part? Is the fact that, missing from that list was like your birth mom or birth dad. How fast did that race through your brain?
Oh, everything does, because it is this entirely blank space of time. So you think about like 3 years of time that I have no way to think about that. Like when I think about my birthday, it's like my adoption day, right? My birth pictures are my orphanage pictures, right? And so to now have all of this information, and to find out what happened, to find out the situation, to find out all of the people that were involved, it's just overwhelming, because now it's like you're getting your birth story back that you never ever had. And just to have that is super precious, because it's something that, you wonder if, because you go through this grieving process when you let yourself grieve. And even things like, did anybody smile at me when I was a baby? Did I have these happy faces that looked at me? And because I have children now, right? And you, as a parent, you try to fill their lives, and especially that newborn stage, with love and happiness and anything you can do to connect with them. And so those are all the things that are empty.
And it sounds like what you found out, though, is that you were fairly adored by these 2 brothers.
Oh, yeah. And this aunt and uncle that are still living. My dad actually was the oldest of 6 children. He passed away about 8 years ago. And, I don't know how to explain, like, just knowing how much they love me. And one of the things that you have to sort of accept is that they've been worrying about you for 40 plus years, right? And even just knowing that that they cared and worried about me and hoped that I'd been adopted to a good family. And I had no idea what had happened with me. And my brothers experienced a lot of pain from their tattoos, actually, right? They were bullied a lot, they were beat up a lot because of it. And my older brother had a lot of responsibility. My dad would say, when we do well, I want you to find your sister. And it's really hard in Korean culture when you're trying to just survive and just provide for yourself and for your family. And then you've got this sort of added layer of responsibility as an oldest son, because Korean culture is very hierarchical, right? And the oldest son has a lot of responsibility. And when you sort of understand that and learn about their story and what they had to go through, and knowing that they loved you that whole time, right? That they blame themselves and they have their own level of guilt and grief that they're experiencing as well. It was just really great to be able to hear about that and sort of understand that there's this love that existed from the very beginning that I had no idea about, right? That I just didn't even know existed. And then to just be given that gift, it was just really amazing.
Well, there were so many crazy twists. There was more intrigue that happens even after this, right? So you take a DNA test, and what happens?
Yeah, so the DNA test was a maternal DNA test because, as was explained to me, because my brothers and I have different genders, they could only do a maternal DNA test to see if we had the same mother. And it turns out that it came back as we don't have the same mother. Now, it doesn't mean that we don't have the same father. It's inconclusive, right? There's just no permanence or just no conclusivity around the father. But for sure, they said we don't have the same mother as my brothers. So,
and nobody knew about that, right? A revelation, at least to your brothers as well.
That's right. My brothers didn't know. And, for good reason. Those were hard times. There was a lot of people that were going through tough times, giving up children for adoption, and then a lot of single moms moving on and never disclosing to anyone that they ever had a baby. So I think it was a need to know society back then. And so, yeah, my brothers were experiencing this for the first time as well. And that actually caused this interesting period of silence because there's this language barrier. I didn't know how they were receiving the news. And I was worried that they might not see me as family or be really worried about going any further because it might shame their family or just whatever. And, I'm American, so I'm kind of used to the crazy.
You've been conditioned by reality TV.
Conditioned. That's right. Like, it didn't bother me. I was just worried about their feelings about the whole situation because I recognized it was probably new to them. And they were actually always also worried about the same thing. They were like, oh no, they're only living relative siblings. She might not view us as real family, being half siblings. And when we were able to finally communicate and just kind of express that concern for each other, everything else went really smoothly, right? Because it was just that moment of like, oh no, they might not be able to accept that. And so, it was nice to know that they were worried about me. I was worried about them. And then we were able to kind of just move forward. And I was like, I would love to meet the family. Like, can we do that in October?
You're listening to the Today's Mama podcast with your host, Rachel Hersher. We'll be back right after this.
Me again with your friendly reminder to make sure you head over to todaysmama.com/myrisk. If you've had a family member who's had breast cancer under the age of 50, your mom, your aunt, your grandmother, there's a chance that a gene mutation may be present in your family. We'll tell you how to get your free MyRisk hereditary cancer kit so you can unlock questions about your health. Of course, we've also bribed you with a whole pile of a lot of bright and shiny. Think a KitchenAid mixer, a camera, a whole pile of prizes, and even better, a whole pile of recipes we've gathered from our team over at todaysmama.com and from women across the internet. We're sharing our very favorite recipes that we've inherited from the women in our family. Head over to todaysmama.com/myrisk to find out how to get your free MyRisk hereditary cancer kit, and you'll find links to everything else I just talked about too.
And now back to the Today's Mama podcast with your host, Rachel Hersher.
So you packed your family up and you headed off to Korea.
That's right.
And what was that experience like? Because I've watched this little like mini documentary kind of thing that's on YouTube, and I'm just like bawling the whole time. And your brothers are so cute, just like so excited to see you and nervous and all the things. So I saw it kind of through their eyes coming through that video, right? What was your experience getting off the plane?
Oh, yeah. So I've actually been to Korea. This was my 5th time to Korea. And my husband actually served an LDS mission in Jeonju, where I was born. So
You're kidding.
Spoke Korean, a little bit rusty, right? Because it's been 20 plus years. And so for both of us, we were familiar with Korea. And so for my children, it was their first time, right? And there was something about meeting my family for the first time where I really wanted my children with me to be able to experience that, because having, blood relatives living in Korea was a whole new experience for me. So I think people expect it to be this super, super emotional thing. And I think there's this whole processing thing that happens. Like you don't even know what emotions to process at the time, right? Because it's all happening so fast and so furious. And of course there are tears. But what's interesting is, and of course they were lovely.
But there's also like language and culture barriers, right?
Absolutely.
To just communicate and reunite in that way that, you're kind of stumbling through it is what I would assume.
Exactly. And it's all new to everybody, right? And every day I kept thinking, oh my gosh, I love this family more and more. Like, is it possible that this could be so good? And then you've got these TV cameras too. And it's interesting in Korean culture, men do not express their emotions and women as well, Korean men and women, when it's this public display, it's hard for them to show emotion. And so the tears were real, right? Because you have to recognize they're sort of breaking through this other layer of Korean culture that they've also grown up with. And I was joking to my husband, I'm like, okay, so when the cameras leave, are we going to see the real them? And is it going to be as good? Right? Because everybody was so loving, and it actually got better. It's like the cameras went away and they could just be themselves and even show more love, which is really hard to explain. And every day I'd wake up and be like, I am living somebody else's fairy tale. How is this my family? They are so, so loving. And, I posted this picture of me in a Korean hanbok, and it's this beautiful, beautiful dress. And it's a traditional Korean dress. And my uncle, when we were messaging back and forth, he kept saying, I'd really want you to wear a hanbok. I really do. I really want you to wear this, and da 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 da. And he was so, so sweet. And I was nervous about wearing a Korean hanbok, right? Because it's this very culturally focused thing that I wasn't sure how I would feel wearing this. Because I actually have a picture of me in the orphanage wearing a hanbok. And that's the only other time I've worn a hanbok.
And describe what that is for people who don't know. I've seen the pictures and It's absolutely beautiful, but describe what that is and what it looks like.
So great. I would describe it as an empire-waisted traditional gown, right? So you have a long skirt, and what they do, it kind of reminds me of a corset. They have this heavy Velcro, and it literally lays across your chest, and they pull it as hard as they can on your chest. Okay. So like, they're like literally smashing your boobs.
Girl.
Right. Because they're trying to slim you as much on top as possible. And then it's empire waisted. So actually it's very flattering, because my Korean legs are very short actually. And so then you get this length from the long, long, long skirt, which is very ornate. And then you put on a jacket on top, which is a light, it's an empire waist jacket, which also gives you the benefit of the length, which is also ornate. And then they also had my makeup done Korean style. They had my hair done, right? And so they have these gorgeous hairpins, gorgeous makeup, and they put on this adorable socks. I put in an Instagram story of these just adorable Korean socks that they have you put on, and then these ironically, white shoes, which I'm like, who thought of white shoes? I mean, they're going to get dirty. But you can't see them because the gown is floor length, right? And they put on this hoop skirt underneath. So you sort of, I mean, honestly, it was sort of like walking out. They pull out the curtain from the dressing room and everybody's like, and you sort of feel like a bride again for the first time. That's how I felt, like I would say princess, right? Because it was just this, otherworldly experience to come out with a totally Korean, gorgeous, gorgeous dress on. And I didn't feel uncomfortable at all, except, when I did pull off at the end of the day, the skirt, it was like, I can breathe again, like I imagine corsets must have felt like, because it's pretty tight. But it was an amazing experience, right? And so again, like when I refer to fairy tale, that's part of it, right? Because the second day, I'm walking around Korea in this gorgeous dress. My boys and my husband are also dressed in a male version of the Korean dress. And we've got cameras following us, and everybody's like whipping out their cell phones. They don't know who we are, but we got cameras following us, right? Taking videos. And we go to this Korean traditional village, and the cute teenager tourists are saying, can we get our picture taken with you? Right. And so you just have this experience that I just never would have had anywhere else in the world. And it's sort of this out of body, like, I can't believe this is me and this is my life.
Well, the story is so miraculous from start to finish, but I'm also sure it's been a bit of an emotional roller coaster. Like, what are the hard parts of this whole journey for you?
The hardest part for me is the language barrier. And, you can always look back and say, oh, well, why didn't I learn Korean? Right. But, where are you going to find the time in your busy life and building a career? Because before, I didn't have a reason to learn Korean. And so for me now that I've had this amazing experience with my birth family and trying to figure out, okay, so how do I build a relationship with them? Right? The language barrier, it's significant. They actually speak different dialects, right? And so the way that Google Translate works, it actually translates differently between different family members. And so there's some that are easier to communicate with and some that are harder to communicate with. And then you sort of have the family dynamics as well, like some message more often than others, right? And that's not something that I want to push on anyone and say, gosh, I'd really love to hear from you once a week. And so just sort of figuring out just the cadence and how do I continue to build a relationship. I have no doubt in my mind that they love me. So that is not, they all want me to come back and visit. And I promise them, as long as I am physically able to do that, I will do that. I recognize it's going to be harder for them to come to America. So that's not an expectation that I have at all, and not one that I'm worried about. I don't really care about that. But it's just, it is one of those, we all have to get back to our real lives now, right? And for so many decades, we've lived apart. And so it's just figuring out how to keep those communication channels open, how to give them exposure to my life. How do I see insight into their life? What do they feel comfortable sharing? If I decide at some point to write something about my adoption or a memoir or about this journey, what are they going to feel comfortable with, right? And what do I need to respect in their lives as well? So it's a lot.
Well, and what's the process or experience been for your family back at home, right? Like your parents and your siblings. How did they process this whole thing?
They've all been really supportive. I feel very fortunate. And I think it's probably just because I'm older as well, right? If I had done this when I was 18, it might have been harder. But my parents sort of recognized that, and I think every parent sort of has to recognize this, that we're not ever going to be enough for our kids. And so whatever village that is that our children need to feel supported, and of course that changes, right? Throughout our lifetime, we're just going to have different needs at different points of our life. My parents just understood that this is something that I needed at this point of my life. And it wasn't something that they were concerned about. I think they've learned a lot from it, right? Because my parents and I have never had a conversation about adoption grief. We've never had a conversation about the challenges that I've had growing up in Utah, in their family, with the dynamics that we've had. And so it's given us some insight into what it means to me to be able to find my birth family, which honestly I didn't expect to happen. I mean, a lot of adoption searches take years. So I have to be honest that for this to happen so quickly within about a 3-month period of time is really, really amazing and miraculous. Like I just kind of expected it to take years and never once expected that I'd actually be visiting Korea this year to visit my family. So I feel really, really fortunate to have just support all around me, even the tech community, my friends, my family, and to just have everyone in every circle of my life just be incredibly supportive.
Well, and tell me what the impact on your boys has been.
That's a great question. Race is a challenge, especially in Utah. And for my children, they go to they go to actually different high schools and they have different experiences. So one goes to a predominantly white high school and one goes to one that has a lot more diversity in that high school. And so again, race is a very personal thing, racial identity. And I think my older son, because of his age, he's 16, it's on his mind a lot more because it's dating years. And then I've got a 12-year-old son who doesn't seem to be as concerned about it yet, right? So they're in different stages of life. So it's actually opened up a lot of conversations with my older son about what that means for him. And it's been, a challenge for him on how to process this amazing experience he had in Korea, where there's no doubt in his mind that he fits in. He's in the majority. He had strangers coming up to him. He's half Korean, so he's got the Western features, actually, that a lot of Koreans, right or wrong, have surgery to get, right? He's got big eyes. He's got the nose bridge. He's got the pointy chin. And so he'd have strangers coming up to him saying how beautiful he was. Which doesn't happen often to him in Utah, which everybody thinks he's beautiful. Don't get me wrong, but it's not in a way of
that people are stopping you on the street aghast.
Yes, exactly. Right. And just sort of this more movie star type of experience for him. And I think for a teenager who's like dealing with self-esteem and then to go to this, like, oh my gosh, and then to come back to Utah and just have to be like, maybe I should be in Korea,
You're like, I had a big future over there. I was like Korean Brad Pitt.
Right? And, and I want my kids to feel beautiful. Every parent does. Every parent wants their child to feel beautiful inside and out, obviously. And so it's opened up conversations about how does he feel about that? And it does affect dating, right? When I was in high school, I never had a date in high school. And I had boys that said, I can't date you because you're Asian. And it's 2018 and my son's still being told that. And it's like, why?
That's
why?
Like a punch in my brain.
Yeah, it's still happening. And it's sad because I'm like, gosh, I never want my kids to have the same experience. And yet they are.
And I just want to think that we're so much better and we're not.
Yeah. So it's these kids just not knowing how to say it, right? Everybody has preferences. I totally get that. Right? It's how do you state your preferences in a way that the person on the other side receiving that can process it. And unfortunately, for him, it goes to race when it really shouldn't, right? It should just go, she has different preferences. Guess what? I, as a teenage boy, have different preferences too, and it's okay. And so those are just some of the things that we have to deal with, and just every family has to deal with it in a different way. But race has been an interesting thing and it's been actually good for us to have these conversations, as tough as they might be, to have these conversations for him to understand what that might mean. And should he spend more time in Korea, right? So if that's something that he wants to do, to be able to reinforce his own identity and to have his own journey around this that might be different from what I had.
Are there any new things, like culturally, that you've integrated into your lives since this experience, like in your home? Or, I mean, I did notice that you've been watching some Korean dramas.
Yeah. Nothing for us really has changed because with my other trips to Korea, I actually started learning how to cook Korean food when I was 25. So we've been eating Korean food regularly. My boys love it. They loved having authentic Korean food in Korea. and that the palette there is quite broad, right? I mean, it is as diverse as you can think of. Unfortunately, we don't have as much offerings in Utah. And just, Korean culture, I started having my kids watch Korean dramas a few years ago too, because again, it's that idea of having Korean males seen as handsome and as beautiful and as desirable and as sex icons, right? Which is not a normal thing in Utah. You've got Crazy Rich Asians, which finally, after 25 years, having an all Asian cast in Hollywood.
Which also, can we just say how funny that movie was?
It was adorable.
It was so good.
So well done.
Yes.
And with a diverse cast also, right? We didn't just have one type of Asian looking person. You had this wide ensemble. And that's actually any culture, right? When I went on a Spanish speaking mission, I had to unbreak what I viewed as Hispanic and Latino and realize they're as diverse as Americans are, right? There's no one look that encompasses every culture. And so you just get to go through that experience, right? But I've been exposing my kids to Korean culture for a while because I've sort of recognized that I wanted them to have some different experiences than I did growing up, especially in media, right? Especially what they see and how they perceive themselves.
And how cool that we do live in a world where you can Google that stuff. We can find these things that would have been really hard to connect to when we were younger.
Exactly. And again, a tribute to technology, right? Netflix, Amazon Prime, all of that stuff we can get. Of course, they shut down Drama Fever, which was the site where you used to get all of the Korean dramas. So there's about a few million people that are not happy about that. But
oh, shoot. Everybody rally for is it Drama Fever?
Drama Fever, yeah. But it is what it is. We want to respect intellectual property rights.
Yes.
But Netflix, right, is carrying a ton of those shows, and so is Amazon. And so we've got access to those. And again, technology, it's another great way that it helps to make our world a little bit smaller, right?
Here's what I promise we'll have in the show notes. I'm going to get a list from you of all your favorite Korean dramas.
Oh, no.
I'm going to have pictures of you in your traditional Korean dress. I will have a link, an embed of that amazing little show that was made about you meeting your family. So I will pack as much information as I can in the show notes. So everybody who's listening, be sure to go find that. You can always find it at todaysmama.com/podcast. And Sara, this has been the most amazing story. Thank you so much for sharing it with us.
Well, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Okay, well, and I'm sure we'll be seeing each other soon at some local tech event. Or maybe I'm going to make you take me out for good Korean food here in Salt Lake City.
Let's do that.
Yes, we'll catch up soon. No cut bop. We'll do something different. As always, you can get the show notes and features at todaysmama.com/podcast. Remember to like, rate, subscribe, all the things, and we'll catch you next week.
You've been listening to the Today's Mama podcast with Rachel Hersher. To find out more, go to todaysmama.com. That's today's, MAMA.com. Today's Mama, connecting moms and families with the best of today.